Greetings and salutations, everybody. It's E. Spencer Kite back for another edition of A Conversation With. And I got to tell you, listen, I've been excited for all of these thus far, but I'm really excited for this one because I got my guy Chuck Mindenhall, the man in the hat, to my estimation, the best writer in the business, a guy that I consider a friend, a role model, an inspiration, and somebody that I've just been looking forward to sitting down and doing this with. Thank you for doing this, man. How are you?
I'm well, and what a great little intro, and what a great avenue this is for you, man. I really love this. I've obviously followed. I've known you for a long time, since we were staying at the Hooters Hotel back in the day, covering events. And I always feel like there's a certain, people find there are certain things that they're very good at, but this seems to be something you're pretty good at, man. I watched a couple of these conversations with, and this is a nice little avenue for you, man.
I appreciate that. I appreciate Sean and Graham and everybody at SevereMMA letting me just kind of cook on my own and come up with some ideas and do some stuff. So it's something that always stood out to me as something I wanted to try, especially getting beyond just the like fight day, fight week kind of stuff, because there's so much more to everybody in this industry than just what we see up front. And so this has been that's wonderful of you to say. I greatly appreciate it. I got to say, I love the stone fireplace as the backdrop. It is phenomenal.
Thank you, sir.
Gives it that gothic feel.
It was one of the reasons I got this house. When we moved in here, I was like, you know what, man, I'll have a backdrop, because for the longest time, just like you got one there now too in your new place, but I'm like, for the longest time I didn't have like a good backdrop, but this seemed adequate. It seemed to speak to me.
Yeah, as soon as we were looking, I was like, okay, if this is the place we get, here's what I'm going to do. Those closet doors are coming off, and I'm using the closet as my backdrop. The room isn't quite big enough to have everything that I want. I wanted it to be one room. We're now using two, but that's fine. We've still got a spare room, so we're good. We're all set.
Very nice, man.
All right. So the way we always kick this off, and we're going to stick to it.
All right.
What was your introduction to combat sports? When did you first get that bug?
Man, okay, so the bug itself. Okay, so I'd seen a couple of earlier fights, but I couldn't even tell you probably. Like my brother-in-law out in Colorado was into it way before I was, and I remember him talking about it. Certain guys, he would just talk about these certain guys. I remember, I think he might have even latched on before, like even during the dark days, like he kind of was following it from a long time ago. So he always kind of kept it in my mind, but I think the first time I really, really got into it was Anderson Silva and Ridge Franklin. It was a little further down the road. I think it was the rematch. I just happened to be in Fargo, North Dakota, doing for a hockey piece I was writing, and they were playing it like a Buffalo Wild Wings. I was just over there, and it was the enthusiasm of everybody watching it. Like I was like, wow, this is crazy. That by the time those guys made their walks, it just felt like you were totally invested in this, because I'd watched all the lead up fights, and as they were making their walks, it already felt like Anderson Silva was like this crazy like other level, just from talking to people, like he was just at some other level. And I was like, okay, I got to see this. And I'd heard the name Anderson Silva, obviously, like I just hadn't really watched him, So it was one of those situations, and I think from that point, I'm trying to think what number that was. 60 something maybe, but that's the one I really watched
in there.
Yeah, I watched that one the whole way through, and I think it was from that point on, man. I was pretty well hooked, and then I started by UFC 82. I was writing full features, you know what I mean? So it was like it was one of those pretty rapid, Yeah.
Was there a boxing intro? Was there like, I know a ton about boxing, so like boxing was the original. Are you another one of like me? I did Taekwondo as a kid. Are you part of that crew that like did the like strip mall karate classes? And that was the introduction?
As crazy as it sounds, man. I mean, I wanted to do karate. I was all into that stuff. Loved Bruce Lee, like growing up, you tried to emulate him on the, on the playgrounds, things like that. But I wanted to do it. It was just something I couldn't get my parents to like actually sign me up for, but they did buy me boxing gloves, and we would have like impromptu boxing matches all the time in my garage with buddies, and the buddies on the cul-de-sac, you know what I mean? So I think I think that's probably fair to say that it was boxing you know, because that was, I can remember boxing events in the 80s, like the big names of the 80s,
Right,
watching
right.
those events, man, and just being like sort of mesmerized. There was something about, I know you probably feel this too, because I know you're an enthusiast when it comes to, you know, just the dictation of wills and the confrontation of these two camps that come together and they got, you know, they go head to head in this very literal sport, you know. And I'm like, I was drawn to that very early. So I was watching that, and then, you know, honestly, man, like even in the writing side, I read some of the earlier chroniclers of boxing, and I think that's where I got the bug to write about it. It's like there were just some really good voices in the boxing realm, man, way back, going back to the 50s all the way through the 80s. But like, you know, after I was reading guys like Mark Cram, you know, and guys like that, like you go back and look up the AJ Lieblings, and then you have this kind of history of boxing that you're watching. So I think that it kind of went like that for me, man. It was like, there was no specific boxing event, but
Right.
the Muhammad Ali thing was so big, and then Mike Tyson, all of that stuff. And, you know, I was always compelled. Every time it was on, I was watching it. That's for sure, man. Yeah.
You gave me the nice segue there as well of the, like, I think reading the boxing guys gave me the interest of writing. What were the desires and aspirations? Like, was it so when I went through high school, English was always my favorite class. I loved sitting down. We had an English writing class that, like, I loved sitting down and writing essays and doing that stuff. I was the dorky kid that wrote my own little short stories and all of that stuff. Was that the same for you, or was it just this is a thing I kind of stumbled into?
Yeah. You know what? I think it's kind of both, because when I look back on it, man, like writing was easy. It was an easy thing. I remember I never sweated English class, those types of things. Like you could, you know, I still remember maybe ninth grade, they always had this it was like a free writing period of 10 minutes, like write whatever you want to write creatively. Like, and I would all think it became a little bit legendary in the class, because I'd write these stupid like tales that were just out of the thing. I remember writing about Karl Malone, making stuff up wholesale, just like, you know, life wasn't always easy for Karl Malone. He was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis as a young child. You know, I was going on with these like ridiculous things, and people still, like the guys that I knew in that class that I've been in touch with, still talk about that. So I would say that there was something about writing that was natural to me, or native in me, to want to do. I wish, like looking back on it, man, I had read more when I was a little, you know, like a littler guy, like growing up, because I really think that I've talked about this before. I think reading, if you can read well, like really read well, and understand the craft of writing, what the writer's trying to do, then you start to be able to write well. And it's that point of comparison of always seeing what good writing looks like versus what you're doing was something I was interested in from earlier. You know, like by the time I started to really try to write, you know, I was critical. Like you'd look at, you know, what Sports Illustrated is putting out, and you say, can I write like, you know what I mean? Like you're always comparing it. So I felt like I was in that from some age. I don't know when, but I was thinking in those terms without really knowing until I started to try to write. And that came more in the 90s, like, you know, in the late 90s, where I started to really try, you know, to really try to be a writer, you know?
Right.
So that's about when it started.
There are people that are going to hear the start of that answer of writing always came easy, and me just nodding along completely in agreement, understanding that are like, these two assholes.
Yeah. Let them think what they want, Spencer. Let them think what they want.
Writing's not easy. Right, these two dicks.
Yeah, that's all right. I've been called worse. You've been covering this game a long time. You know what it's like, man.
We've been called worse by better, so it's fine.
And the funny thing about MMA, and you've experienced this too, there's no way that you can be like a serious or real writer in this sport. You know, it's like, even though in boxing, you know, they had those guys that were completely revered and they could cross over and write about anything. Well, it's, you know, I always felt like there was a stigma.
Not us, though.
Yeah. It's like there, you know, where there's some schmoes who live in our, you know, in the basement who, you know, found a forum to write on or something. You know, it's like, but you know, it was not like that. It never has been. And, you know, man, I was like, I'll go toe to toe with any of these fools. You know, that's how I felt. So I hope you know what I mean? Like you have to have that kind of defiance in this game a little bit.
You mentioned the reading thing, and it's interesting because it's one of the things I say when people ask me, like, how can I be a better writer? What can I do? And the first thing I say is read. Like, just read as much as you can. Find people that you think are the best in whatever field it is you want to get into. And I think it applies MMA and otherwise. Find the best. Go read them and see what they're doing differently than what you're doing. compare your work to theirs, learn the craft. And not everybody can. That's the other thing that I always mention as well, is like, look, you gotta be a little bit tough on yourself. If it's not looking as good as you think it should, or the feedback is, and you got to listen to the feedback. If the feedback is, hey, this isn't up to snuff, it's not because people are being assholes all the time. Sometimes you really do have to sit down and hammer at this craft. Like we say, it's easy. It comes naturally to you and I, but there's a ton of work that has gone into this. You are surely a better writer today than you were 15 years ago.
And it's not like when I say that it came easy, like English came easy when you were in those classes, right? But that's like, so the bar is like, you're going against the other kids in the class, whatever the teacher's expecting of you. But man, dude, I had to struggle. When you're writing articles, I worked at the LA Weekly back in the day, man, which was like filled with top-notch writers. I mean, the place was just, it was like every day you're in there, there's somebody you're like, wow, like these guys, even the contributors, they were just phenomenal writers, and that'll humble you quick, man. And I remember just writing stuff, and they would either, things would get cut, they'd get edited. There are a lot of talks about, whatever it is, and you go through those bumps, and you have to handle it. And that was just the beginning. I mean, I've had so many I don't know, like just hardships of figuring it out. It's a very isolated experience, really, because you sit down to write, it's between you and your story and what you're trying to communicate. And then, and then somebody started, and it can be sacred to you. And I think that's something that you have to start to let go too, but you turn in whatever thinking it's like here, and they're like, oh, no, you got to work on this. And you'd be like, what, so I went through a lot of those hardships. It came a little naturally to me, like early, like obviously, like what you're saying, it gets tough when you're trying to be good at it, like, especially when you're pitching or doing pieces for, respected places that hold a high standard. I mean, it's tough for sure.
What was your entry point into just writing in general? Like you mentioned LA Weekly. What was sort of the first gig that like, I guess maybe even before that, how did you get to, this is the thing I want to pursue professionally?
It's just a slow moving thing. I mean, I look at these dudes now, and I'm like, a lot of these guys are in their 20s, and they're already kind of working in jobs that I think that they want. I didn't really know, like, especially in my young 20, right out of college thing, I didn't really know exactly what I was doing. I wrote for the college paper, but not a lot. Like I just contributed here and there, maybe like 10 or 12 pieces all told at the Metropolitan in Denver. And I think that if you're really looking at it, that's probably it. It was like, you get your byline in a newsprint like that, and you're like, wow, check this out. I remember being very proud about that. Like, you're talking to some students or whatever, and you're like, hey, check this out. I've got a piece in here, and writing up various things from baseball to like like the art exhibits in town, all this sort of weird variety of stuff. But I think that ultimately it was that. And then I moved to California, and, I'm doing things like waiting tables and, you're just kind of odd jobbing it and trying to figure out what you'll do. But I think that there was a writing aspect I was trying to pursue subconsciously. Like you're out there like, what opportunities are going to be out here for me? But that's kind of how it happened. I eventually like interned at a place called LA Parent, which was like a parenting magazine, just to see how things run, behind the scenes,
just to get a sense.
Yeah. And, it was like, I would say that it actually fed into my idea of how things were run. Then I went to LA Weekly, and that's when I really, at somewhere before the LA Weekly is when I was like, all right, I'm going to go for it. What's the best route? I'll go to it. And like, so I went to the LA Weekly, and then that's where it started. I would say that that's where I was like, I was really fully trying to be a writer, not just a journalist, you know what I'm saying? But like a writer, like where you're trying to write pieces and trying to write, in the way that the people that I looked up to and I like to read. So I was like, I want to do it that way. I don't want to do reporting. Like you can do the reporting, but I want it to be the writing that really stuck out. So that's when it happened for sure, man.
And so then how do you go from writing just whatever's assigned and whatever the latest, hey, Chuck, I need you to go cover
oh my God.
To now this MMA thing is my lane. And this is where I'm going, and this is what I'm doing.
Oh man, see, because I mean, like, well, I'm talking about like we're talking about like 1999, 1998, So it goes back quite a ways. Obviously, I've been at this for a while, but like, then you go into the aughts, right? And I moved to New York, and I was doing freelance writing for like on music stuff. I was doing a lot of music writing, and it's hilarious to look back on that because, you know, I freelanced a couple times for Rolling Stone. I did a lot of stuff for Blender magazine. I don't know if you remember that.
Blender. I loved Blender. Blender was a every Tuesday that it hit the bookshelf.
Yeah. And I mean, I did a lot of stuff, but it was a lot of the stuff I did for Blender was the upfront stuff. So it was kind of almost like tabloid section of the book. So
Man, was I reading Chuck Mindenhall before I knew about Chuck Mindenhall? Look at that.
I had something in just about every episode, every edition of that. So so I was doing a lot of that, but I mean, they paid really well. And then I became like the rap reviewer for like a few months at Entertainment Weekly, which is hilarious because that is not something I have a ton of I do like, you know, I like hip hop, but I like a lot of genres, right? But that is something I didn't have a ton of context in, but somehow I pulled the wool over their eyes. And then so I was doing all that kind of stuff, and this was for years, man. And not just for that, but like just where you're freelancing. I freelanced for a few years, and then long story short, I went back to California at some point because they opened up like the LA Weekly. There was a new alternative news weekly called the IE Weekly, Inland Empire. And I went and I was the editor of that paper. They hired me to be the editor in chief. So I went there. I was doing that. And this was like a massive area. They kind of covered you know, like just inside of Orange County and Los Angeles, there's a big land space with a lot of towns, Riverside, San Bernardino, all that stuff. You probably know a lot of them because the fighters are from these places. A lot of them are from these areas. And I started to cover that area. And it was through that Dan Henderson was getting ready to fight Rampage Jackson. I think it was UFC 77 or 78, one of those two. I get the numbers mixed up, but he was getting ready to fight him. Right. Yeah. And I did a couple little pieces on that, just knowing that he was in our area, and so was, you know, just beyond the boundary in Orange County was Rampage. So it was like I was like, oh, there's two local guys. They have this huge fight coming up in the UFC. Did a couple pieces on that. Dan Henderson then fought Anderson Silva at UFC 82. I mentioned that earlier, and I was just like, it was my paper. I mean, I'm running it. You know, it's like I was like, I'm going to assign myself.
I'm going to cover this.
Yeah, I was like, I'll assign myself a cover story, and I went out to Columbus, and I did this piece on Dan Henderson, and you know his whole experience, and it was my first real, you know, dive into that world. I met like so many people, and loved it, man. I mean, it was once you go to the event and you kind of meet you meet the factions and you meet the people surrounding it, and everybody's like very hospitable, and like it just was a cool experience. So I wrote that piece and I came back and I was like, sort of like, man, I would love to kind of segue into that if I could find a way to do that, I will do it. And your boy Thomas Gerbasi, I actually hit him up. I don't remember if he just saw the piece or if I sent him the piece, but whatever the thing was, I hit him up at some point, like really soon after that, and said, hey man, if you ever need anything, you know, I've got a job, I'm happy, but if there's something that I can moonlight with, if I can write a piece or two, go ahead. And he was like, yeah, he liked the piece. And I did some stuff for UFC.com, you know, like back then. And so I did like that for like a year where I was getting like a couple of guys where you would interview them. And so that kind of, you know, really got me involved. And then it took off, man, because then I started doing Fight Magazine, and from there it was just off to the races. There was all kinds of stuff, but that was the transition period, and it was UFC 82 that turned me to the corner where I was like, all right, how do I do this?
Right.
How do I zero in? Yeah. And honestly, man, just real quick, like I had already looked at the fight game, like who's the writer? Who's the guy who's like, is there a good chronicle? Like who's doing this, right? So you were mentioning finding your sort of niche within the sport. I was like, I kind of looked at it like, who's doing it? I didn't see anybody doing it. There was that was like consistent. So I felt like maybe I can fill that need, you know, maybe I can jump in there and be the voice of the sport, or be one of the guys who really covers the sport in the way that I like it, you know? So I think that was the kind of catalyst, was just I saw a need in there and I thought I could fill it, you know?
I will say mission accomplished, and you'll demur and do the usual, like, man, no, but mission accomplished.
I hope so, man. I like talking to you, and like you talk to people who've been in the game a long time, and you know, honestly, having the respect of the industry itself is big, right? Like you just want over the course of time, like, I feel like, you know, most people will say nice things about me, that I've done some good work. So I'm like, I'll happily accept that, because,
Right.
you know, you don't get
Yeah.
fanfare too
No.
much out of it, you know, like I'm
Yep.
saying beyond MMA. So, a lot of times it's, you know, it's still warms your heart, you know, to be like, all right, okay, I've changed, you know. I still hear about the Jason Thacker piece all the time, or
Right.
things like that. And I'm like, all right, well, you know, that's cool to me. You know, like a
Yeah.
piece that you wrote that really resonated. I love that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll get to some of those. We'll get to Fight Magazine and sort of the
Cool.
whole journey, but I want to go back to the freelancing and sort of cobbling stuff together, because it's a thing that I did. It's a thing that a lot of us that have gotten to various points in this industry have done. And I think it's a thing, to me, that is really important to talk about for emerging people, up and coming people, people that want to get into it, because getting here and getting to where you are, getting to even where I am, it's about hustle. It's about, like, nobody's coming and knocking on the door and being like, hello, I read that one thing you wrote and I'd like to pay you $75,000 a year. And all you have to do is 3 pieces of like, that doesn't happen. I didn't make money for the first bunch of stuff that I did. I was fortunate that Jeremy Botter saw some of my work on Bleacher Report and was like, hey,
started. Wow, that's crazy.
Like, I was doing a blog of my own back in the days that Blogspot was a thing, was syndicating it through Bleacher. Before Bleacher became what it is now, you could just use it as a syndication vehicle. So I would send everybody back to my little thing. And Botter was one of these people that saw it and was like, we're starting this thing with a guy that used to be an editor at Fight Magazine. Shout outs to Matt Brown. Yeah. Are you interested? And I was like, of course I'm interested. Like, of course I am. Does it pay anything? And he was like, no, not right now. Yeah. And I was like, that's fine. Yeah. Let's go. And so I guess maybe just speak, if you could, about sort of the, you know, the lifestyle and the hustle that is required of, I'm working at 5 spots. I've got 6 deadlines. I need to cover 3 genres and just find a way to, like, to me, that's the thing. That's the filter for this. Yeah. If you can get through those days and you can survive that. Then you've got a future.
Yeah. You know what's funny, man? Like, I mean, I'm just kind of like, it's, you get to a certain point where you kind of don't look back like that. Like, but it's always fun for me to remember, because there were a lot of, I mean, it was just a lot of uncertainty. The racket is like that in general. Like, it's there's a lot of uncertainty with the, as you know, I mean, I've been at multiple places that, you know, the stability is not always there. But if you're really going back, yes, I mean, I always looked at it, first of all, like this. What I recognized about it was that it was like a campfire for the disenfranchised, or the people who are just sort of rudderless, and writers and things like that. I felt like a lot of people that came to MMA, I don't want to say that they kind of failed out of other situations, but maybe they just weren't finding, you know, they couldn't find an entry point in another sport or another place, right? Like, I was doing okay. You know, you're editing a paper. I was doing fine. I was, you know, I was already kind of known for still decent writing, things like that in specific areas. But I felt like it wasn't really going to fulfill me long-term. So it was sort of weird. Like, you're still kind of looking, what's the thing I want to be doing? Right. And I felt like that's where MMA came in. So just to preface it with that. And then once you kind of had that, I was kind of willing to do whatever it took, man, to make that work. Just like you. I think that it was, you know, you're pitching. I would pitch anybody who I thought I had a shot of doing something with. And every time there was like a possibility of a long-term gig, I was like, ooh, you know, you're all ears to hear about it. Like, there was a magazine that was supposed to start up, and man, dude, I still, this was one of the biggest bummers at the time. I forget what year it was, but Brock Lesnar was getting, it was before UFC 100. But anyways, Brock Lesnar was getting ready to fight on that card, and they were like, it was going to be called MMA Rage. It was a magazine, and it was like, they were the same people who put out, what's the popular basketball magazine? You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, Slam magazine.
Slam. They put out Slam. So I'm like, okay, wait, they're putting out an MMA version of Slam.
They're real.
So I'm like, I met with the editors and the guy that, you know, I was like, this is awesome. you know, they're New York based. It was one of these things I was like, this is really cool. This is exactly what I want. You know, like
Right.
I can write like a writer and be in this cool glossy magazine. And immediately they're like, hey, can you go out to talk to Brock Lesnar out in Minnesota, where he was living in town, Alexandria, Minnesota. And I was like, hell yeah. So I went out there thinking that, and we're doing, this is the first cover story for this, right? And I meet with Brock. It was this whole thing, like met him again the next day, did this piece, wrote it up, and then they're like, you know what, man, it's not happening. They're pulling, like, you know how it is. It's like, this isn't happening. For whatever reason, they didn't get the funding, or somebody up top just kind of nixed it at the 11th. They're like, no. Right. So I had this. So, you know, you're just sort of crestfallen for a minute, like, dude, what? You know, like this is one of the first times this happened. This has happened multiple times since. But then I'm like, this is how I found Fight Magazine, is because I had a piece. I already knew Fight Magazine. I thought it was pretty cool, man. Like you mentioned, Matt Brown. I think I'd talked to him maybe once or twice at that point. Who was the other guy? There was another editor there.
Donovan Craig was there.
Yeah, Donovan Craig. I talked to him, and Jim Casey. Jim Casey. I was like,
Jim was there.
Jim was a great guy, and I think it was actually Donovan. I said, hey, man, I explained what just happened.
Right.
I said, but here's a piece. If you you have use for it, like
if you want it, I've got this.
And so I think he was like, dude, this is awesome, you know, because I came to him with a piece. I felt like I put real effort into it, you know, like where you're like, you really tried to make it good. And he already had a cover. I can't remember which one it was. So it didn't end up on the cover, but it ended up in this nice spread in Fight Magazine. Right. And that's how Fight started up. They were just like, okay, he can write. What else can we do with him? You know what I mean? So it's like that. One thing fails, you kind of fall forward a little bit, or you fall back, and then somebody picks you up. It was a lot of that sort of thing early on, man. Like just one thing to that, but I was willing to go through hell, man. Like just to get it rolling. There was a couple years stretch, like I mentioned, where I was like, I'll do whatever, like whatever you guys want. You know, I wanted to write, but like if they wanted me to do, you know, blow for blow, you know, whatever it was, or handle their Twitter account or whatever, I was like, all right, I'll do whatever. I was down to do it. So I did some of that stuff too. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's sort of I mean, it really is. It is the proving ground, right? How much like do you want to do this, or do you want to do just the thing that you want to do? Because like, look, sitting and doing recaps of events, they're 7-hour events. It's not a lot of fun. And if somebody, you know, the days when we didn't have all the fights on streaming and things like that, when you would do actual live blogs of blow for blow, round for round, and then send it, and then you're just constantly updating the post. That shit's long and it's hard and it's tiresome. Yeah. But it's a great way to weed out who really wants to do this.
Yes. There was a time, man, where, you know, just going to the live shows was, it was so cool, man. I was like, you'd go to any live, you wanted to see so when you're starting, you just want to see as many of the fighters that you kind of wanted to see. You want to see them all live at some point. You want to say that you were in the building when they fought for this belt or that or whatever. So I think that was kind of it too. But for the Fight Magazine stuff, it was funny. Like I kind of looked at it as my baby for a little while, because I think I did maybe a dozen cover stories for them. I did quite a few over the course of 2 years. So like I would do one, then somebody else would do one, then I would do another one. Right. And I would always go out and, you know, hang wherever they were, what city they were in, hang with that fighter in their life. And I felt like that was another important aspect, because it wasn't tied to the live event. Right. It wasn't tied to that. It was like, you're spending time with them. Who are these people in their life? And that also got me just more and more into it. Cause I was like, you know, you understand how much they sacrifice, you know, to get into these situations and all that, man. I know you like the human stories. Like you've done a lot of those in your time too. And I think that was a key. It was a key part of my trajectory, because humanizing these guys and knowing what they go through was a big deal. Like so much of what happens on Twitter is just so throwaway. Like people just become faceless whatevers. They have no real emotions, and you know, people are just cruel, honestly, when it comes down to it, or dismissive, which is sometimes worse. But I felt like doing that and having to spend time with them and writing these pieces and spending so much thought on it. It really gave me a respect that I've never given up, man. A respect for what they're doing, man. That's something that stayed with me the whole time. And I made sure of it. It was part of the scaffolding of how I wanted to to keep this going, is be respectful of these guys, because they put in a lot, man, you know?
Yeah. I think that's That's a very important takeaway, an important thing for everybody to hear and understand. It's one of the things that I want to do with this show and with all of my work is like, there's more to this person than the fight that's going to entertain you on Saturday. There's more to what happens in life than they go out, they win or lose, you win or lose in terms of bets or whatever, your picks, whatever. Here's all the other stuff. Because the other stuff to me is always what makes them even more compelling. As you said, like, when you get to know some of these athletes, it becomes easier to root for them. You become more invested. And I think that's a piece to sort of tie this to some of the stuff you and I do, and that you do better than me. You had multiple covers. I had one.
Did you
shout
do
out,
what was
shout out to Thiago Alves.
Is that who you did?
After all of you guys were gone, I got one. I was happy.
Did you go to Florida?
No, I didn't. No, this was in the fight doesn't have much money left days.
I was still there. I was still doing stuff during those days too.
Yeah, where I can't remember his name now. Jim was still there.
Yeah.
Landon was running it.
Oh yeah.
Landon was running it. And he was like, talk to Thiago, find out. And it was right after one of the hurricanes blew through. Like,
oh man,
he had gone through some stuff, and I was like, this is a good piece, dude. And he's like, all right, it's the cover. I was like,
nice. That is fun.
Pretty sweet.
It's cool to have a cover. It is. It's very.
It cool. Is. It's different. But like we mentioned, the like humanizing people. I feel like one of the things that's lost, because we've lost the magazine industry for the most part, or at least especially in this industry, we've lost that element. We've lost that way to convey it, because the UFC schedule doesn't necessarily allow for it the way that sitting down with a magazine and reading the profile that you put together, or that Ben put together, or that whoever put together, gives you that greater insight, where you're looking, maybe the magazine comes out a month before the fight or 3 weeks before the fight. You get a chance to sit down, and now you're going to learn a little bit about Brock Lesnar or Thiago Alves or whoever it is. How much do you think that's contributed to sort of getting to where we are now in terms of fandom and the way these things are covered?
Oh, it's crazy too, because so like just going back, and then you go forward, like how many things I've done like this. Like, so we've done even because I went to ESPN for 3 years, and then MMA Fighting for 6, and during those, and The Athletic for a year, and during all of that, you're basically doing what we're talking about, which is you're putting together thoughtful pieces on the people themselves,
very tight deadlines,
or situations or whatever, but you're giving the gravity, you're giving the long view of like exactly what you should be thinking about. You're planting deeper seeds into what is going on, rather than just the stuff on the surface, or he said, she said on Twitter, or stuff like that, right? Like, I think that what sucks about right now is how happily we've went past that. And so like, it makes it very difficult, because you're like, what starts to happen is podcasting, doing this kind of thing, is actually maybe the bigger forum for actually being more profound with what you're trying to do, right? Like, it becomes that, because I think that's how people are, consuming media more. The written word is still 100% there, but it's just a different thing. And there have been a couple of times where I think I've written something really outstanding or whatever, and you put it out in the world, and you're like, I don't know how many people actually cared to read that, and that was not the case earlier.
Right.
It's an unfortunate development, if anything. I do think social media and the news cycle and the UFC, you could look at the circumstances of all of this.
Right.
Just marching on constantly, marching. The attention span, people like, battling for your attention span, like the consumer, anybody who's just idling, their attention span is being pulled a million ways. To sit down with an article these days is a lot more difficult, man. I mean, it takes us a little bit of a commitment to be like, I'm going to focus on something, and there are plenty of people who do, man. I still get tons of people who talk about it to me, like, I loved your pieces back then or whatever. And so I know that a well-written piece, or like a strong something, if you've done something that it changes their mind, or they read it, they will stick with them. But it is different. It's different right now. It is discouraging. And it's like one of those things you have to kind of like figure out how how to move with the times, and not everything that you do is, it's not like what I got into was to be a writer. I didn't get into a podcaster and all this stuff. And so like the things that you end up doing, I'm like, it's a little bit off, and that hurts a little bit in the end, because you spent so much time kind of building the other thing. Having said all that, I still love writing, and I still keep writing, but I'm like, it's just, it has taken on a different form for sure, man.
I mean, here we are, right? Like, I didn't get into this to be a podcast host, to be on video, to be doing this stuff, but this is certainly the way that it's going. This is certainly a thing that I've come to understand I need to do if I want to continue to exist in this space and have my thoughts and ideas understood. I still write. It's why I love the duality of what I have. Ton of video stuff and auditory stuff here at Severe, and all the written stuff over at UFC.com, where I get to do those sort of more in depth and sit down with people and talk about them as humans, as opposed to just previewing what's coming up. But it's weird, man, right? Like it's so different, and it makes me feel like such an old to be sitting here like, well, back in my day, we just read everybody's stuff. But that's the changing of the times.
It is the changing of the times. And it's funny. I still think that people, if you can write, I think that people will still come. Like, I think that the confusion is, and I mean, I think I've seen you kind of complain about this too, the Twitter beefs and making articles out of nothing. That has really been what is the garbage point to me. I'm like, it's become, I was at MMA Fighting, and I've been on record saying this. It's like the MMA Fighting I was at originally was just this all-star team of everybody could do something well.
Amazing.
My writing was, it's like writing was kind of what I did. But when it started to devolve, and I don't, whatever, people are making a living over there, it's all good, man. Like, but most of these MMA sites now are they're 90% that, they're 90% sensationalized, no context, what he said, she said, let's form it into a 200-word piece and post it and get the clicks and then move on to the next. It's just, once it moves to that, that's when I'm like, okay, where am I doing? Like, I can't. I'm not doing that stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you would be cheapening your whole experience if you went and that's what you were going to do with the rest of your life. Like, you cheapened everything that you set your foot in and like and resolved to be. Like, I can't. But that's, I've seen you complain about this too.
Oh,
and I think
100%.
Yeah. I mean, it's just I refuse to participate in that anymore. But so I will roll with it in any way that I can still be a creative center myself and be the guy that I want to be and talk about the sport how I want to, whether that's podcasting, writing, whatever it is. I have a site now, The Myth. I need to do it more, but I created it just so I could continue to do what I do. I'm not, it may not be monetized all that much, but there's a couple sponsors that came on, and I'm like, you know what, man, if people care at all, I'll just keep doing it there or at the Ringer or wherever, but I'm not going to, I won't
stick to the things that you want to do.
I'm
as
not playing
opposed
that
to
game. I don't. If that makes me old, Spencer, fuck it.
Yeah, and I mean, look, we're getting older. That's just part of life. It happens. You mentioned The Myth, so let's get there. Not only in terms of the site itself, which everybody should check out, the mith.com.
Yes,
always great stuff there, but also the nickname itself. The origins of Chuck Mindenhall and the particular hat itself, because it is a certain style of hat. You do stick to it. They are now available as well for sale as merch, which is awesome. Which is awesome. It was long overdue.
Yeah.
But what created? How did this? Like, I'm a hat guy. Clearly, I wear. Anybody that watches my content, I pretty much have a toque on most of these times. A, it's cold in my office. B, it saves me from having to do stuff with the long unkempt hair.
Yeah.
But what I mean, I'm pretty sure Ariel coined it, pinned it on you, but like, is it just I like wearing hats? Is it as simple as that?
I would say, let's say I started shaving my head, like in the 2000s, I don't know, like maybe early 2000s. And I lived in New York City. I started wearing these hats then, like I was like somewhere in that range, like it's 2003 or something. There was a traveling Borsalino, I think it was called. It was like it was a hat like this. I just kind of dug them, but it was also very cold out there, and you got a shaved bald head. You're like, you could fended off. But I honestly, man, it was nothing intentional. It was just one of those things. I think I just was wearing. I started wearing them. I'd buy these at Target, man, way back in the day. Like I would just, they were dirt cheap. You just pick them up. And I think I wore them to the a couple of the fights. People started to recognize me because of the hat. And it was a weird thing. And I was like, all right, cool. You know, like I said, you want to be in the game and however way you want. And I felt like they were related. It's the writer, you know, the guy who has the hat, blah, blah, blah. But yes, you're right. It was when we started doing the MMA beat, I would wear the hat and I would go on there and Ariel would he would always introduce me as the man in the hat or the man with the hat. I can't remember how he used to say it, but it became the man in the hat. And I was like, you know, that's like myth. That's like, you know, so it was like one of those things. I think I was the one who kind of like started to say myth. I just said it in a couple of things. Or no, maybe I wasn't. It might have been Jeff Wagenheim. Somebody started saying the myth. And then
shouts to Wags.
Yeah, Wags, man. You know him. He's always got something to offer. So I was like, so I think at some point, I don't remember the exact origin of that, but I just started running with it because it was like, and then we did the Man the Myth with the Sean El-Shadi, that podcast. And then from that point, like the myth was like talked about. So I was like, well, I should just call the site rather than like Chuck Mindenhall or do a Substack. Why don't I just do the myth, you know, and that we'll just call it that. It seems a little weird. Like I've always been very strange. I try not to have like the big ego of some people within the industry, like, but I don't feel comfortable sometimes being like, oh, the myth, you know, I'm the myth, you know, or something like that. It took some convincing for me to actually do that. But in the end, I thought it was catchy enough. I was like, all right, I'll do this. As long as people want to read, I'll put it on there. So that it was just one of those things, man. And it's funny because Luke Thomas, like when I go on do the Morning Combat, and I've done the MMA Beat with him as well. He always be like the Iceman, you know. And so there are certain people who call me the Iceman. It's like whoever just continuously says that type of shit, you know, it becomes like a nickname to whoever that demo is. Like they hear it and they're like, that's the myth or that's the Iceman. So there's multiple nicknames going on.
Fair enough.
Since I'm wearing this, I guess
since you're wearing that,
Iceman makes sense, you know.
Shout out to the crew at Roots of Fight, Vancouver's finest. Yeah, tremendous gear.
When I said that people were monetizing the site, they were one of the original ones to kind of help me get rolling. I mean, they've been Roots of Fight, man. Those dudes, they're the best. I haven't worked with something like that ever, man. They're the greatest.
Amazing people.
Yeah.
So the hat choice, though, was it like, did you cycle through various types? Is it just that baseball caps don't work? Fedoras aren't your style?
Like baseball caps forever, man. I mean, all the pictures of my youth, I'm in baseball caps. And that, you know, I love basketball. So it's like you had basketball, but baseball style caps, you know. I did that forever. I just, at some point, I just saw the hat and I was like,
grew up a little bit.
I lived in New York City. Yeah. I lived in New York City. It's probably just this. I think it was just, where did I get that hat? There was just a hat I bought one day. It was actually, I have it somewhere up here. I have like hats all over this room, but it was like an old, it's a billowy type hat, like almost like a French style weird. And I wore that one. I was like, it looks a little too, there's too much to it, you know? But then I saw these like little flat caps and I was like, oh no, these are perfect. And honestly, man, like I dig them, but like, nobody was wearing them. This is a crazy thing. Nobody was wearing these. I swear to God, that's why it stood out. Nobody was wearing them. Now, so many people wear them. You know, like you ever have that moment where you're like, I wonder how much of my commitment to that, like, open the floodgate, not for everybody, but like open the gates for other people to be like, you know what, man, I could do that. You know?
Yep.
You never know. You never know how much you influence that. But I know I was the only dude I knew at the time wearing them.
I'm not going to lie. I got one of those because of you.
Did you?
I got one of those that works that I was like,
10% smarter when you get one of these.
It just looks a little different. It's not the baseball cap. You don't look like the little kid rocking around in the ball cap. You're not wearing a toque or beanie, whatever you want to call this, depending on where you live.
You look good in the beans with the beard. That looks good, man.
Trying. Yeah. All right. So we got that covered. We're going to shift gears a little bit here.
All right.
Denver sports.
Oh, no.
Particularly
I got a heart out. I got to go. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I'm kidding. Particularly the Nuggets, because we've got a two-time MVP in Nikola Jokic, who is just phenomenal. We've got a terrific Canadian in Jamal Murray. We've got Michael Porter Jr. And yet we haven't gotten that elusive Larry O'Brien to hold up for you to enjoy. What's it like being a long-suffering Denver Nuggets fan?
Well, first of all, who's your team? Do you have a team?
So because I live in Canada, I automatically have to appreciate and represent for the Toronto Raptors.
Okay.
But as a franchise, I was always drawn to and fell in love with the Jason Kidd-led Brooklyn Nets.
Oh, wow.
Or at the time, New Jersey Nets, back with Keith Van Horn, Kerry Kittles, that crew when they made the finals. So still consider myself a Nets fan, which is just an absolute dumpster fire.
Oh my God!
And
this is the bad.
Felt that way from the minute they said, "Hey, we're bringing in Kyrie too."
Yeah. Well, the Earth is flat, but I will say that no, man. But man, I gotta say, like I hate these, like, you know, man. Ariel's always like, see, Ariel.
I saw him hit you with it. This is what put it in my. He hit you with the, like, can you tell me what happened at Madison Square Garden the other night? And you wisely said, "Look, giant asterisks." Dude.
My larger point is he's always like, you know, basketball is back in New York, my friends. It's like he's you know, it's a shtick. He's got like this thing where he wants to, like, you know, it's every year is the year. I'm saying this genuinely, that this could be the year. This could be the year. And I really believe that. I would almost never say that in my timeline. There might have been 1 or 2 years where I thought it could be the year. And it just so rarely happens that you think that they actually could make it out of the West. Forget about winning the title. Like, I just want them to get to the title series, because they've never done that. They, you know, in my time, which is, you know, like in the whole time I've paid attention to the Nuggets, and it goes back substantially long time, man. I've been watching this team, going to games since I was a little kid. I've just never had it. Like, it always felt like there was always going to be a tyrant, or there's a storyline. And man, I do believe the NBA for the longest time. I think it's less now, but the NBA was protecting a lot of this stuff for the longest time. The Denver Nuggets were never on anybody's radar, and they were never going to allow the Denver Nuggets to play, say, the you know, Indiana Pacers in the finals. That was never going to happen. It always had to be one of the pillar teams. So I know people call me a conspiracy theorist on this, but I'm like, it's the truth. I've watched.
No, listen, go back and watch Sacramento and the Lakers game 6.
Dude, I mean, and so there was you're battling a lot of elements here as a fan. So I'm saying this legit. I think that this could be the year. And the reason I say is, for one, I don't see a tyranny within the West. Like, you know, you got the Suns, you've got a couple of those teams. They're pretty good. But there's no real tyranny. There's no real tyranny. There's no bigger market that demands a story. There's no Kobe Bryant just died in a helicopter crash, and therefore you're not getting through that team in the Western Conference Finals, which honestly was a big storyline. That it was like, nobody's beating the Lakers that year. And I'm, you know, it's that type of stuff. Like, they've went up against a lot of different storylines along with a tyranny of a team. This year, I just don't think that happens. But the bigger reason is Nikola Jokic, man. I think winning those MVPs is huge for Denver. I think it actually puts them on the map in basketball. People are watching. National media now pays attention to them in a different and reverent way. The small market now becomes a market that they're paying attention to. There's reverence on the name. I think that all of that really matters. He's playing at the top of his game. If he stays healthy, that's the key. Him being back with his buddy Jamal Murray, who was out all of last year and missed the playoffs the previous year because of his ACL. People forget how cathartic he was in the bubble, man. He was scoring 50 points. Game 7, they were down 3-1 in the series. He would catch fire. They beat the Clippers and the Jazz basically on his back. They forget how good he is in clutch. Like, this is a dude who's legit that good, and him and Jokic just play well together. The keys, though, are obviously the health of him and Michael Porter Jr. And Michael Porter Jr., dude, he's working on his defense, but that shot is finally starting to fall. I'm seeing it, man. And I'm like, that was the big thing. Is he going to be able to hit that three-pointer? Is it going to be, are we going to see that silky shot? So far, he's like 50% from three. I see it. I see the potential. They're running deep, man. They picked up Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I think he's a good defensive guy for that lineup. He's perfect for them. And then, of course, Aaron Gordon, who came over in the trade. They were undefeated when he came over from Orlando for Gary Harris. They were undefeated at that moment up until Jamal went down. They were like 8-0 going into that game with that full lineup. And then he got hurt, and everything has kind of happened. People forget, man, like how good this team was then. They're really good right now. So I'm optimistic. Let's put it that way. I hate to say it. I hate to talk about it. I just want to see it. I want it to be like, I've told people this before. I think I would bawl. I think I'd be like,
I was going to say,
I'm still 8 years old
because
I've been waiting the whole time. Like since I was 8 years old, I'm trapped in an 8-year-old's mind with them, like waiting to celebrate, this whole thing. So
8 years old. I don't know exactly how old you are. So I'm trying to think of
36.
Are we
you're
talking
going back? I'm not 36.
Yeah. So we're talking like Michael Adams, Fat Lever.
Oh yeah. Those are my guys.
Alex English. Yeah.
Alex
All
English.
right. Dan Issel in the late
Rainbows.
stages.
I went to a ton of games, man.
The fabulous jerseys. I'm glad that they brought it back to like pixelated Tetris block.
Yeah, those are pretty
jerseys.
cool.
Those are terrific jerseys. All right. So we got that part. We got this. You can take the sip, have the deep sigh, have the deep breath to get that part out of the system. Because now we get to talk about successes. Because Chuck Mindenhall wrote a book with Ben Askren called Funky. It is out now on bookshelves and on booksellers. There we go. We're gonna get it. There you go.
Boom.
What's the process like of sitting down with Ben? And I mean, not even just with Ben Askren, but just in general, because like Ben is a entertaining, compelling dude to sit down with, but just the general of sitting down and being the guy that's listening to the stories and chronicling the stories and putting them down and going through that process. Because it's something that I want to do. It's something that I have been working on for, let's see here, about 7 years and haven't quite finished. And so what was the process like for you of putting it together?
Now I'm curious.
Yeah, I got a project that is long overdue.
Wow.
That when Court McGee sees this and hears this, he'll be like, damn it, man, write my book.
That's a good one, though.
So
that's a very good one. He's got a story. I would say that this particular thing, man, to be honest, this isn't it's not the kind of project I thought I would do.
Right.
If anything, I wanted to, I've had a couple of other types of things that I want to work on or have worked on, but this was just something that came up because we had this pandemic that happened, and I was at the Athletic with full assurances that the Athletic was going to be thriving in the MMA space for a long time. And it wasn't. As soon as we got to the 1 year mark, they the story. They laid a bunch of people off. I remember talking to you about this at the time. We were kind of like, I don't even know if I want to. Do I even want to stay in MMA at this point? Like, do you want to just segue and do something else at this point? But during that time after layoff, Ben had got in touch with me and he said, hey man, would you be interested in doing this book? Or would you be interested in writing my book? I was like, no. I think my initial reaction was no, because I'd been asked this question a bunch of times. Like, it's just the way, over the course of time, fighters have asked this. There's been a couple of gym guys, like gym owner types, who've been like, hey, you should do this thing. I'm always like, nah, that's not really what I'm not trying to do that sort of thing, but right. Circumstantially, he just hit me, I guess, at the right time. Cause I remember I kind of was like, you know what, man, I still was leaning no. I was like, nah, I don't know, man. But then like that night I was kind of thinking, I was like, he has a kind of interesting story. He's actually weird because he's virally made fun of now because of that Masvidal thing, which actually, if for a writer, you're like, that's a very interesting note because it's unique. Who has that? Who goes through something like that? It was such a polarizing figure. So many people dancing on his grave. I felt like there was like a lot of things to that. And I kind of was working backwards and I was like, he's a 2-time Hodge winner in wrestling. And I asked him like, what do you have in mind? And then I was like, are you thinking of doing it as a memoir or like as a biography? Do you want it to be written about you, or do you want
to by you?
And he was like, yeah. He was like, and we kind of went back and forth. And I was like, if you want to do it as if you're writing it yourself, really all I want to do then, if I'm going to do it, is match your voice. I want to be your voice. I want to figure out how you talk and like tell your story. And so once we did that, once we had that conversation, I got on board and I was like, let me come out, because there was nothing going on. I mean, there was a few things. I was still doing other little gigs, but it was like, I had time. I was like, I could do a project, So I was like, let me come out to Milwaukee. We'll sit down for a few days. And what I did essentially, because I've never written something like this, I was like, I kind of said, how do you want to do it? Do you want to mix up the timeline? Should we bounce from one place to the next and then come back? Or do you want to do it kind of just straight down linear, like, and or I said, do you want to start with the trade, something like that, the trade, and then go through your linear like that? And he was like, yeah, that sounds cool. So once I kind of had that, I basically could think about the chapters, how they would look. I could actually say, all right, I think that the first chapter is about the trade. The second one would be about early life somewhere. Third would be about when he got into wrestling, fourth, fifth, sixth, and then in the latter chapters, the last couple, you could be straight up about attitude or psychology or whatever. Like it could kind of just branch into whatever you wanted it. And I was like, once I did that, I was like, okay, you got a game plan. So when I went to talk to him, I already kind of knew this, so I could outline it. So I could ask him specific questions and kind of know that you could put them into buckets of wherever you thought they would end up in this book, which was strategic, and it worked. It worked to do it this way. So I just hung out with him for a few days, man, and he was on crutches. He had just had his hip surgery, and he had nothing better to do. So he's like, he would just talk to me for hours a day, and I just got it all down, came home, listened to it all, put it all into notes, all of that, and listened to the way he talked a lot, just so I could make it sound like him. And I started it, and I would write a chapter, essentially send it to him. He would read it. He would tell me if there was something wrong, or if I got a timeline wrong, or whatever it was, or we just changed some stuff. He would work through it. I'd do it again. And then that one would go to bed. You'd do the next chapter. It was like doing 10 or 11 specific essays, and then you stacked them all together and made a book. It was like that. It was fun.
How long are we talking start to finish?
So I worked on it for about, okay, so this is if I'm sure you've dealt in this, like it wasn't like there was a publisher saying like, hey, we want Ben Askren's book.
Right.
So we were doing this on spec. And I was like, I've never worried too much about that, because you're like, you know what, man, you're a big name. I've been around the game for a long time. Somebody will publish the book.
Right.
So I had to then write a chapter. I think I wrote like a chapter or two, and then I had to put together a whole proposal, like the pitch.
Right.
And find. I had a literary agent who just stopped. Like he quit before this happened. I'm sure he was mad at me, because it's like I had him for a couple years, didn't do anything. And then as soon as he's like out of the game, he's like, now you're going to write a book. But I had to find an agent. That wasn't too tough. Like I was able to get the agent, and then he kind of shopped it around. That process took a few months, and I kind of put it on hold, because I was like, I don't want to spend all this time writing it if it's not going to go out there. But then he came back with a couple of different publishers, and one of them was Permuted Press, which is an editorial arm of Simon Schuster. So I was like, that sounds good. They wanted to do it. So once I got that process done, it was probably, I was already 6 months into the thing, but once that was there, I was like, okay, now I need to get back into that mindset and write it. And so that probably took me another 6 months. So all told, it was probably a year. I was doing it. It wasn't my primary thing, because I'm doing other stuff. So it was like, you're doing it a little on the side, you're doing it in free time and stuff like that. And there were certain days I'd try to designate and just give it the full attention. But it was, if I had wrote it the whole way, it probably would have been a 6 month to 8 month thing, I'm guessing, because there's just a lot of stuff that goes into it. But it wasn't that bad. I mean, it was, once you're rolling, it was not that bad.
That's the point I got to get to, is the rolling and the just getting into it. Because
it's tough when you're
spending the time is tough.
If you're spending the time, and it seems abstract while you're doing it, because you're working on this thing. Like I said, it's an isolation, right? Like you're just writing in this thing. You have no idea. It's almost hard. It's hard to project something like that ever really being in the public eye. Like because you're just buried in this document that you're using, and that was tough to get over. But I think once I was into it, and I was just, it'll get out there, it was fine. It was his book, and I told him, like, I don't need to be on the cover. In fact, I didn't know. I was sort of like, don't even mention that I wrote it. Like I was like, that I helped you write it or anything, because I didn't really need it. I was doing it strictly to like have a project to do. And then I was like, you know what though, as we got toward the promotion, when it was in, he was like, how do you want me? Because he didn't want to say he wrote it, because he's like, I'm not a writer. And
as told to.
So that's, he was like, finally I was like, dude, just tell him, like, it's an open secret anyway. People are talking about, I'm like, just tell him I helped you with the book, blah, blah, blah. And so now it's an open secret. Now I'm talking about it. But it's like, honestly, it started out, I wasn't even going to be mentioned in it. Like, I was like, I just wanted to make sure, my whole objective was to make it sound like it came from him, that it was his voice. And the most gratifying thing is he basically has made that point a few times, even on Le Batard, when he was on there. He's like, he made it sound just like that I wrote it. He used phrasings that I would use and all that. That was the hardest part, and that's what I'm glad that it worked.
Well, I'm definitely going to check it out. I recommend everybody does. Ben Askren is a very, very interesting cat with a very
He is.
interesting story, as Chuck just mentioned. Like, it was
He's not
long before.
afraid either. He's not afraid. He gives you. You've talked to tons of fighters. A lot of them are sensitive around things that embarrass them
Right.
or humiliate them. I mean, like,
Right.
that's part of the game. But those chapters are so good in that sense because he was so open about losing
Right.
and failing in public and being memed, and like all that stuff.
Yeah.
It was just really good stuff there. So I'd recommend it on those things alone. I just think it's very insightful into a competitor's mind,
Yeah, for sure. So on the writing stuff note, what are the keys to you to being a good writer? We talked earlier about reading a lot of stuff, getting yourself immersed in the quality writers that are out there and understanding sort of how they do things. But what are some of the other tips or pointers you would give people if they said, hey, Chuck, what do I need to do to be a good writer?
Well, man, it's like, this is so specifically my domain, but I only connect, like, right. I saw a AJ Liebling quote. It was in the Sweet Science. I don't know if you ever read that book, but it's still one of the best, the gold standards of fight writing, like I've seen. But like in the very beginning of that book, he says something like that. He's talking to his like, how do you talk to your editor? And he's like that basically you're yelling from one end, I'm alive, and the other is, I'm alive too, and you're shouting back and forth, we're both alive. And I always think that that's kind of the point of it. Like, you want people to read and connect to the thing they just watched in a deeper way that says we had the shared experience. Like, you're communicating to a larger psyche on what they just watched. And if you get that, if you know that you're in that zone, like if you're able to write that way, that should be your goal. And a lot of times I'm trying to take the spirit of what I just watched, even if it's abstract at first, and say like, so you just plant that. How am I going to put that into words? And I don't really stress about that. I actually believe the subconscious, like if you go to bed that night planting it, you can get up the next morning, you'll have something to say. Like, I believed in this process, and it has worked for me. I mean, like I can get up and just write something. A lot of times I'm surprised at what I actually came up with, because it was like a weird, just a weird thing where you start to do. It's a process of discovery as you're doing it. But like, this is mostly column work I'm talking about here, like writing columns
Right.
after fights or after whatever. But that sort of writing, like that's what it is, man. It's like only connect. Like, you're just trying to sum up for everybody what they themselves maybe haven't. What you want to hear. To me, the greatest thing is like, dude, that's what I was thinking. I just didn't know how to say it,
Right.
Or you're hitting the thing that's just been bothering them, or you're delving into the thing that they're the most curious about. I think that those things, just kind of understanding, really having your pulse on that, is the key, And I don't know how many people think about this, but that was my whole mindset through ESPN, MMA fighting, everywhere I was a columnist. That's what I wanted to do, And if it's like a profile or something like that, you just want to make sure that now you're communicating the essential thing that you've understood about this person to that public in the same way. You're basically you're somehow giving them, the thing that is there, like the essence of what that person does or who they are. And that's a hard process, as it's like, it's difficult to do that, but it's I think that's the key, is like, you're trying to do it. You're not trying to just run down a bunch of facts about this guy, but you want to actually give them insight into what this person is. And so that became my goal with profiles and features and stuff like that.
Right.
Simple. If you keep it simple, you know what I mean? Like, it sounds complicated, but if you trust that you're trying to do that and you keep it as simple as you can, I've found that works for me. It's weird advice to give, because not everybody wants to write. Not everybody has thought about writing in the ways I have, but it's like, that's how I do it,
Right. You mentioned that being how you do it. And sometimes it's going to bed with an idea and letting it sort of take root. What is your process? Are you a process writer kind of guy? Is it the room's got to be right? I got to do it in the morning. I got to do it at night. Like, is there anything, or is it just when it's time to write, I sit down and I do?
I could write. I mean, I could write. I've done this so many times where you're just at an airport, like bar or something, or, like you sit down, it's just madness all around you. And I still write the same. Like, I could write in the middle of Times Square, like, it doesn't matter. I know some people are fussy that way, but I mean, I think because I've had to do live blogs and stuff and events, you just focus in on your computer and you're able to do it. I don't really have a process. I would say that the morning I've realized is the best time for me. So like, if it's something happens, or like a lot of times it was, hey, can we get a reaction off of whatever just happened, like some piece of news? If it was in the afternoon or night, you'd be like, all right, I'll do it in the morning, and you would just kind of plant it. I wouldn't actively think about it at all. And then you would get up and write it. And, maybe you've said something very insightful. And I think that's where it's like, you got to trust your own knowledge. You have a ton of knowledge about all the fighters. That's one of your special strengths. You could pull up like a Rolodex, guys who are fighting on the prelims, you know what I mean? And know about them. You would be able to inform. I believe that you have to like really harness that sort of thing. And say, like, I know what I'm good at. And I'll trust that I'll do it when I wake up. And I felt like morning writing, just because there's nothing's bothering you yet. There's no,
Right.
it's
right.
Nothing affected you. You just wake up and you're straight into it. And I found that was the most effective thing for me. So if there's any, and I've written plenty of times in the afternoon and night, but preferably if you're asking about the ideal conditions to sit down, that would be it,
Same. I'm the same way. I like getting up, that first cup of coffee. Nothing's,
Yeah.
as you said, nothing has happened that has pissed me off yet today. I can focus in on the thing I got to do. And then if there's more to do later in the day, fine, we'll get to it. But that one that's important for that day, that's circled on the whiteboard or whatever it is, as this is the thing that has to start this day, get it done early before anything drives you insane.
Exactly.
Okay. If you were put in charge of the UFC, it was handed over to you. Dana White is gone. It is now Chuck Mindenhall's baby. You get to make 3 changes. What would they be?
Oh my God. Talk about being on the spot.
Here we go.
Man, that is tough. I am so different in the sense that there are dudes you could ask and they'd be like, only 3. They would want to get in,
right. They have 15 things that they've been thinking about for 3 years, that they want to change the color of the octagon. They want to fire the octagon girls.
Yeah, for DZX. I don't know, dude. To be honest, man, you could get into the nitty gritty of fighter pay. So I suppose the fighter pay thing would probably be something, obviously, that you would address.
Right.
I know that, and you've talked a lot about this. I probably would not hold the amount of events they do, but I know why they hold the amount of events they do.
Agreed.
I would certainly bring that back, because what has been lost is the sense of event. And I've harped on this forever. I liked it when there was 1 or 2 in a month and you could really focus on those cards. That has been compromised, and it's so merciless the way it marches on sometimes that you're just like, I feel like it's part of it is, why we don't celebrate these guys and humanize them even more is because they're gone in 2 weeks. Like they're gone back into, it's a rear view mirror thing. Like you have to keep looking forward. I'd definitely do that only from that viewer experience. I think that that would be the wheelhouse. The strength is for people's attention span would be that, like, to just reduce it by have 26 events.
I was going to say the sweet spot to me has always felt like somewhere in that like 28 to 36.
I think that would be tremendous. Fighter pay, you would have to, like, obviously when the discrepancy between what the UFC is made, when you're able to kind of understand those numbers and you understand what other leagues are doing, okay, like I would fix that. But that's me. I'm like, I'm a guy who I think this way. And obviously I didn't build the UFC like Dana and these guys. Like, obviously they know what they're doing too, and they've got to this point, but I would revise that.
Right.
Those would honestly I'm so not bothered by most things that people are, that I would say those are the two biggest aspects right there. Like, I would look at those 2 things, and you could go into a lot of other stuff, like promoting certain people better, or but I think that would be hand in hand with just having less events. So I'd say those are the 2 big ones.
Agreed. All right, well handled. Who is one fighter over the course of your coverage of this sport and enjoyment of this sport that you were just if somebody asked you, guarantee me this guy or girl is going to be something special, this person is going to be a contender, that you were like, here's who it is, that you were just completely wrong about.
That I knew that I was completely wrong about?
That you were completely wrong about.
Brandon
that one
Thatch,
person that stood out that you were like, gotta be.
Brandon Thatch is one of them. Remember him?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
I
Big, tall welterweight from Denver.
Yeah, I would say that's a big one because I talked to him. He was in Denver, Colorado. I remember just visiting him, and there's something about his demeanor. And then he came out of the gate real hot, like he looked good. I kind of went on a limb, I think, on him. Like sometimes you go out on a limb publicly where you talk about it.
Right.
Sometimes you just really believe that. Like I kind of really believed it. I was like, watch, man, people are going to know this guy's, he's going to make waves. And I was completely wrong on that. I feel like there are others. He comes to mind because he was I remember feeling like that.
Right.
One of them, and this one, obviously this is the big what if, but as a beat, right? Like I felt like I circled him pretty early and I was like, this guy will create waves. He's going to be a champion. And it wasn't like he flamed out,
there was just, he's one of those what ifs. He's one of those.
Yeah.
If we could have gotten more of him, that's sort of the Tatiana Suarez of it too, right? Like
Tatiana,
if she could have stayed healthy.
I think she's actually coming back though, I think, but we'll see.
Yeah. I'm waiting for that day.
God, I know
I had Tyson Griffin early in life.
Tyson, yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Little compact, got some power, can wrestle. Yeah, that didn't work out. Were there any hits? Were there any like I've got this person from early on and they ascended and got to where you thought they would get?
I mean, a lot of them who have made it, like the guys who've won the gold, I felt like I was more like other people saw it too, like I knew Khabib Nurmagomedov, like watching him, like that's going to be very tough to beat. That is going to be very tough to beat, guys like that. But guys who snuck up that I watched Calvin Kattar. He hasn't made it to the thing, but I watched him earlier in his career, like before I knew of him before the UFC and all that stuff. And it's like I think that I kind of had him circled a little bit to go that far. He's still got a chance, obviously. Like he's still there. It's not like he's too far back. Who else? I know there's been a couple. I mean, yeah. I would be like one guy that I thought might was Frankie Edgar. But he was so small. I just remember somebody. It was like, you remember Seth Kelly?
Of course.
Yeah, UFC. I remember him talking. Yeah, the Abu Dhabi card, UFC 112, and I remember him saying, not to throw him under the bus, because everybody thought this. Everybody thought that BJ Penn was going to kill. He's going to kill him. He was like, we might literally see a casualty in there. He was like, he had the sense of humor, but he was like, we might literally see a casualty. I think Frankie had no shot. And I remember thinking at that point, like, I don't know, man. I have a feeling Frankie's going to win this thing. Like, and it sounded stupid, but I think I saw him coming a little more than other people. Like, you know what I mean? So maybe a guy like him. I definitely was. I thought he was going to be competitive in that fight, and obviously, like he went on to do what he did. So pretty amazing.
If there is one fight that you want to see the most right now, what is it?
It's probably still the Francis Ngannou versus John Jones, but it's like I think we've talked about it long enough now. Where I don't know if you start to lose interest because your imagination is now getting bored with the hypothetical. Yeah. Or if it's just you're trying to guard yourself because it may never happen, like sort of thing. But I think that that's still the one, right? Like I think that there's so many. If they booked it right now, I can tell you it would be right.
The reaction would be right,
because I still think that heavyweight, like if you get the right heavyweight, like it presents a broader spectrum of interest. Like I think that a big heavyweight like Francis Ngannou, especially if they're promoting it correctly, speaks to so many people. It's like it's just like the Mike Tyson thing back in the day. People are going to pay attention because the dude looks like he should be a heavyweight champion. But then you get a guy who's considered the GOAT, who's been away, who's moving up to heavyweight. I still think that those storylines and the interplay in between those things would be huge, man. And then honestly, to see those guys staring at each other would be amazing. I'd be like, this is real. You know what I mean? Like, so I still think that's
for sure.
Yeah. What about you? Who would you take there?
I mean, that's the same for me. I think that's the same for most people. And I'm at the same point you are. Like, it's one of those things for me of like, I don't want to hear it's close. They're talking about it. We're thinking about stuff. I don't want to hear any of that until it's signed and it's official.
I hear you.
And everybody steps out and it's like, this is when it's happening. And we get the UFC announcing it officially, not the UFC doing the like, this is happening. And then John Jones jumps out and is like, no, not happening. All right.
Let me ask you one.
Fire away.
I know that you're one of those guys who, like, if you see a lot of hype going one way that's sort of unearned, like, you'll voice it, like, you'll say, like, hey man, this guy shouldn't be hyped like this yet. Or you'll see a guy that's been around a long time that you're like, he's not getting enough hype. But let me ask you this, like, who's right now? Because I know you're a little bit like, were you like Sean O'Malley, right? You kind of were like, let's make sure he earns that hype first.
Yeah.
Like, who right now outside of Sean O'Malley is the guy that is being a guy or a woman who's being overhyped, that you feel like still has a lot to prove? Like, that is being overhyped. You know how they do this. People circle a guy and they're like, we'll celebrate him. And is there a person that stands out?
So, I mean, O'Malley gets full marks now because he went out and did what he needed to do. So Andre Fiallo, who fights this weekend, we're taping this on November 18th. He fights on Saturday. People will see this after he fights. He was a guy prior to that Jake Matthews fight that I was like, guys, let's hang on here. I don't even know if there is anybody right now that feels like they are too much hype, which is weird because there's usually at least one or two people that are getting too much. It feels more right now. I mean, Paddy Pimblett is too much hype. Molly McCann was too much hype, but like I also understand that is as much charisma as it is combative skills. I think more so right now we're seeing a bunch of people that are just underhyped, a bunch of people that are like, more people need to be talking about X, Y, and Z. And so that actually, to me, feels like not a bad place to be, where you can have some of these people creep up and sort of catch up to people rather than like have a bunch of people. Like, I would rather surprise people than a bunch of people be like, this is a person. Cause like Paddy Pimblett and Jared Gordon in a couple of weeks, that can be a real sad trombone if Jared goes out and smashes that dude.
That's a minefield. Yeah. I think that's a good call, Paddy Pimblett. I will say that, like, I know that you've harped on this stuff. That's why I was asking this. But a person like Erin Blanchfield, I know you've been writing about her for a long time. It's funny how overshadowed she was.
Just crazy.
Oh, weird. And then she does what she does. And then even guys like Moicano, right? Like, you see them and you're like, all of a sudden people take notice as if he just materialized overnight. Right. Like, dude, that guy's been at it forever. He's like, the diehards know, but like the people who sort of just tune in, they're like, oh shit, that dude is legit, you know? Yeah. It's funny.
He was a top 10 featherweight for about 6 years. And then he was like, I got to go up. Yeah.
Now everybody's talking about him.
Yeah. You know? That's the cycle. And I mean, look, better they're talking about him now than still not talking about him. But it's crazy. Well, listen, man, you look like you're going to ask me another question.
No.
I was going to say, I have taken enough of your time.
I'm not putting you on any more hot seats, man.
That's all right. I love it. I welcome it. This is a two-way conversation. This is a conversation.
Great forum for you, by the way. This is what you should be doing, because you're a genuinely curious person who likes to hear. I think a lot of people in this sport don't really take the time to listen to their subjects, really listen to what they're doing. I feel like you always have done that. So this is aces, man. I think that you should keep this up. I didn't get a chance to watch your Dan Hooker one yet, but I could see that one being very thoughtful. And I saw the comedian guy. The actor?
Blake Harrison. That was cool. That was cool to do.
Very cool
guy
stuff.
That I didn't know prior to sitting down with him, but had seen some of his work. Go check out the In-Betweeners if you haven't. From younger in his years, but very entertaining. Cool. Sophomoric if you like that kind of stuff.
I do.
I've taken a bunch of your time, man, and I really, really, truly appreciate it. Let people know where they can check out all of your stuff and follow the work of The Myth.
Well, you can go to themyth.com, MITH. That's where I'm gonna be putting more. I'll populate that more with my pieces. I just there was a lot going on, but I'll be hitting that more. I'm at the Ringer. There'll be some stuff coming up there, MMA. So I'm one of their few voices in combat sports. So I'll be doing more for that side of it. And then if you want to hear the podcast I do with Pete Carroll and Ariel Helwani, that is the Ringer MMA show every Thursday. Unless it's a pay-per-view, then it's a Friday weigh-in show. And then we always have, after every big event, we do like an instantaneous reaction pod. So that's where you can catch us, man, on Spotify Live. So, that's primarily where I'm at.
We will put everything in the show notes below this post. Dude, this was high on the list of people I needed to get on this once we started launching this. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for doing this. It's been a pleasure, man.
Awesome, brother. Thanks, man.
All right, man. Everybody, we'll see you next week.